Hi, and welcome back to Wars of the Ring. Today's video is a short companion piece to my Battle of Five Armies analysis. Last time, we examined the Allied battle plan and the principle of draw, pin, and break. Today, we'll take a closer look at one specific aspect that had to be left out of the main analysis: how Dáin's charge succeeded. I will not retell the battle itself here. If you have not already seen the full analysis, I recommend watching that video first, as this discussion builds directly upon it. The point we are interested in today is simple. Unlike the elves, Dáin's dwarves were never intended to pin the goblin army or become engaged in a prolonged struggle. That task belonged to the woodland elves, whose larger and more diverse force was far better suited to sustained combat. The dwarves had a very different mission. They were to deliver a short, violent assault designed to rupture the enemy line at the decisive moment. In many respects, they were perfectly suited to such a role. All were veterans. They fought in heavy armor. They carried the equipment of professional soldiers and formed a true shock infantry. They were the Allied army's best-suited force for such a task. Yet this strength also concealed a serious weakness. There were only 500 of them. Against an army numbering many thousands, even elite infantry can quickly become isolated. A frontal assault may lose momentum. The enemy can refuse close combat, harass the attackers from a distance, or simply envelop them through superior numbers. Military history offers numerous examples of heavily armed shock troops struggling to bring a more mobile enemy to decisive close combat. If committed alone, even the finest shock troops could have found themselves surrounded, exhausted, and ultimately destroyed before achieving a decisive breakthrough. This was especially true because, as discussed in the full analysis, the goblin forces deployed on that side of the river were most likely flank troops. Their role was not to withstand a frontal assault by elite heavy infantry, but they were probably highly mobile and well-suited to harassing an advancing enemy. And this is precisely where the men of the lake entered the equation. By fighting alongside the dwarves, they fundamentally changed the nature of the engagement. Their numbers and greater variety of troops, likely including archers, made it far more difficult for the goblins to avoid close combat or rely solely on mobility and harassment. Most of the men were probably not professional soldiers, yet they were properly armed, physically larger than the goblins, and numerous enough to provide the mass that Dáin's force lacked. While the men extended the line and secured the flanks, the dwarves could concentrate on the task for which they were uniquely suited: breaking through the enemy's center. The combination proved remarkably effective. The men supplied the weight. The dwarves delivered the shock. There was also an important psychological dimension. Seeing an elite force drive steadily through the goblin line would almost certainly have strengthened the resolve of the men fighting beside them. Success breeds confidence. As the breakthrough gathered momentum, the willingness to press the attack would only have increased, reinforcing the offensive at precisely the moment it mattered most. Another interesting point comes from Tolkien's own description of the dwarves' equipment. In addition to their two-handed mattocks, they carried short swords and round shields slung across their backs. The mattock was ideally suited to a violent assault, maximizing the offensive power of the initial charge. But once the breakthrough had been achieved, momentum would inevitably diminish. The fighting would become slower, more static, and increasingly fragmented. At that point, the dwarves could simply abandon their mattocks and take up their swords and shields. Their equipment, therefore, reflects two distinct phases of combat. First, the shock of the assault. Then, the sustained fighting that followed. Once again, Tolkien's tactical thinking appears remarkably coherent. The success of the charge did not rely solely on the courage or quality of Dáin's warriors. It also depended on employing the right troops, with the right equipment, at the right place, to solve a very specific tactical problem: overcoming a severe numerical disadvantage through concentrated offensive power. I hope you enjoyed this short additional analysis. If you have another interpretation or would like to add something, I'd be very interested to read your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.